everyone. Welcome to our PlantPure Kitchen Live. I'm excited today. We are making easy vegan pad thai. I had to hesitate there because I have a pad thai recipe that is in my PlantPure Kitchen cookbook. There's a pad thai recipe in here. This is a little bit different than the one in the cookbook. It's an easier version. When I think of pad thai, when you go out to eat and you order pad thai, you get rice noodles fried in oil. Sometimes you'll get some eggs in it. You'll get a few vegetables, but you'll get a lot of sort of oily, rich, unhealthy food. So if I were you, I wouldn't order pad thai at a restaurant. Even if you ask them for without the oil, they usually really put a lot of oil in it. So this recipe is going to be with no oil. There's 4 components, maybe 5 to pad thai. It's obviously rice noodles, which we're going to use today. We'll talk about those. It's vegetables, lots of vegetables. It's eggs. They tend to use scrambled eggs. I'm going to use a scrambled tofu. It's a sauce, and then it's a garnish. And sometimes there's a protein in it. If you go to a restaurant, you know, they put fish or seafood or chicken in it. We're just going to stick with the tofu today and bump up the vegetables. So we'll get started. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to cook the noodles, but my stove is not quite high enough and it's not boiling, so we'll just let the water boil, and when it starts to come to a boil, then we'll put the noodles in. I know that was the first thing that I had in your recipe, but whenever that water is ready, we'll go ahead and get to it. These noodles only take 3 to 4 minutes max to cook. You don't want to overcook them because they'll be really mushy. So let's skip that step and go right to the tofu scramble. So I have onions, and we're going to heat up our pan. Oops. You want to get your pan kind of hot so that your onions will start to caramelize, because what we're going to do with the scrambled tofu, we're going to caramelize those onions like I do in almost every recipe I have. And then we're going to add some tofu, and we're going to add a little bit of turmeric to make it bright. But while I'm waiting for my pan to heat up, I want to talk to you about salt. I know some people don't use any salt at all, and that's fine. You don't need to use salt in this recipe. But there is a salt, and it's called black salt. It's a really interesting salt because it has a very eggy flavor, and it's hard to find. I had to go to an Asian market. I don't use it very often, but if I make tofu scramble, sometimes it's kind of fun to use a black salt. I'm going to use a little black salt tonight just because it's going to add an element of flavor to it. If you have it on hand, certainly you could use it. Let's go ahead and stick my onion in here. I don't know how hot it is, but this is different. I have an induction stove at home, and I love my induction stove. It's on and it's off. Gas takes a little bit longer to heat up. So we'll start with that. You know, pad thai is a really interesting recipe. I think of it as 4 S's. It's savory, it's spicy, it's sweet, and it's sour. So tonight you're going to be building up your Asian pantry because you're going to be getting unusual ingredients like tamarind paste. What else did we get that was a little bit different? Rice vinegar, sriracha if you haven't normally got that, and ginger. So those are, to me, Asian flavors. So you can see my onion's going to start caramelizing. I always keep water or vegetable broth next to my pan because that's what I use to deglaze the pan with and keep it from sticking. But you want to just do your onions because that'll flavor everything.
And Pepper wants to know how much black salt you add.
Okay, how much black salt should you add? It really depends on how much salt you're using in your diet. If you just want a little bit, I'd start with 1/8 of a teaspoon to 1/4 of a teaspoon, just enough to get flavor. I think sometimes people think salt is, you just dump it in every layer, but just be really mindful because when you're using condiments like sriracha, that has salt in it too. And we're also going to be using Tamari sauce, so just want to be very, very mindful of salt. All right. Then you can see I've got a little bit of brown going on in my pan. I've had a lot of people ask me what kind of pans I use. I used to use mostly stainless steel, but now I'm really stuck on La Creuset, and I know it's expensive, but these pans, they're so nice. They don't stick, they clean up easily, and we also have an outlet here, so I get them at a pretty good price, but they'll last you a lifetime.
And we have a question from Marcy about tofu. She said, we buy tofu in 14-ounce packages. Can we use all of it in this recipe? And if not, what are some fun and easy ways to use the leftover tofu?
Okay. I heard you, but the speaker needs to be a little bit louder because it's not I can't really quite hear it. But no, but you wanted to know what to do with the other half of the pack because we're only going to use a half a pack of tofu. So what I would do with the other half of the pack is put it in a baggie. Maybe you can use put some of the water in the baggie too to kind of keep it fresh. If you don't think you're going to use tofu, you can also freeze tofu too. Tofu actually gets firmer when you freeze it. All right. So the onions look like they're done enough to start adding the tofu. I'm just going to take my hands and I'm going to just break it up. You can use a fork if you want. I just think this makes it a little bit better. I use my hands a lot when I'm cooking. So my daughter is asking questions for me, and answering questions. So I wasn't able to quite hear her with the mic, so we're working on that. If you wanted to use the whole pack of tofu, you could certainly do that. It's just going to have a lot of tofu in it. This recipe has a lot of vegetables going on, so you don't want the tofu to overpower the pad thai.
Here's another question from Linda Hendrickson. What would you think of using hing as a fatita? I've never heard of that. Instead of black salt, H-I-N-G, hing.
I have never heard of it. Hing acid. I have never heard of it. So I'm adding, if anybody else knows the answer to that question and they're on, answer the questions because it's nice because when we're all cooking together, sometimes some of us know the answer when I don't know the answer to that question. Okay, turmeric. Turmeric will make this really bright and yellow. I'm using about 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. And this is actually what Nelson and I have for breakfast on the weekend mornings. I have to move this a little bit. Oh, I'm not going to fuss with it now. Okay. And you can see I've got a lot going on here in terms of drying out. It's okay if you add a lot of water because the more it cooks, it'll kind of dry out a little bit. So I'm going to turn this pan off. I'm going to add a little bit of black salt. And that's your scrambled tofu. And that's what we would have on the weekends. And then I would put things like peppers in it. I'm going to pull this back, you guys. Boy, I'm making a mess up here. There. Things are melting on the stove. I'm not used to gas. Okay, so you're going to turn that off, completely off, and then we're going to scoop it out because you're going to use that very same pan to cook your vegetables in. So we'll put it in a bowl, set it aside. And the other cookbook, the PlantPure Kitchen cookbook, I actually bake my tofu and we put the tofu on at the very end. It's more of a garnish, which you can do that too if you don't like the scrambled tofu. And then we'll set this aside over here and we'll get back to that later. So your water should be boiling now. you have a question?
Is your mic set up well on your shirt? Because people are having trouble hearing.
Can you hear me now? Can't hear me? It's good now? You can hear me? Okay. All right, so let's talk about pad thai noodles. There's a lot of pad thai noodles to choose from. If you go to the Asian section of your supermarket, that's usually where you'll find pad thai noodles. I actually found moringa pad thai noodles. These are kind of interesting. We had these the other night. And then there's white pad thai noodles. And then what I'm going to cook with tonight is brown rice pad thai noodles. And they look like this, and they're kind of folded over. And we're going to use these. And I'm really not going to do much while I'm cooking these noodles because you don't want to overcook them and you don't want to turn them into mush. But this is the brand that we're using tonight. So then you can just move them around a little bit, and literally in about 3 minutes, we'll take these out. And I think if you can find brown rice noodles, that's the way to go. Can you hear me now? Is my mic is working? Okay. Okay, so while that's cooking, let's talk about the vegetables. The choice of vegetables that I chose for this particular recipe is I'm using some cabbage, and I cheated. And I went to the store and I bought a coleslaw mix, which just makes it 10 times easier, or you can cut your own cabbage. I'm going to use some red pepper, which I've sliced. I shredded a carrot, and then we're going to use green onions, and that's it. Except I decided, because we've had so much bok choy from our CSA, I decided to add a little bit of bok choy. And somebody asked me a question, they emailed me a question, they could not find, they couldn't find the bean sprouts. They're a little hard to find. So I suggested you could use a little bit of bok choy to put over the top because it's kind of crunchy. So I'm going to go ahead and slice this up. You really can put any vegetable in a pad thai. You can put broccoli, spinach, anything you want, purple cabbage. I think color is really nice. So that's ready to go. And I think the next step I'm going to do is I want to make the sauce, because when I'm cooking the vegetables, I want to have the sauce ready. I don't want to stop there. So I'm going to use my bullet, which is a really nice way to make a small sauce. If you love this sauce, and you're going to love it, double the recipe, because you can stick it in a mason jar, stick it in the refrigerator, and then you'll have it later to make a stir fry. We make stir fry with pad thai sauce all the time. So it starts out with 2 garlic cloves. If you don't have fresh garlic, you could certainly use dried garlic if you want. And then ginger. This recipe is truly my cheat version. So you can get ginger like this, and you can run it on your microplane. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm just going to do the cheat version, which is 1 teaspoon of ginger paste. And you could get this in the produce section, of your supermarket. I'll put that underneath the camera so you can see it. And then about a 1/4 cup of water. And I know I always say this, but sometimes starting with less water is better, and then you can always bump it up. And then we'll add 3 tablespoons of a low sodium Tamari sauce. If you're being careful with sodium, you could use 2 tablespoons. I always use Tamari sauce because it's gluten-free. So many people are gluten-free. And I like the flavor. It's just more of a smoother flavor.
Kim, stop for 5 seconds, all right?
Yep. Are we ready? That was perfect timing because I had to rinse my noodles. And actually, they came out perfect. So I want to put these under the camera so you can kind of see what I did. They're not real mushy. They're going to keep on cooking when you stir fry them. So it's okay. You don't want them mushy. But I also shocked them. I call it shocking. When you take pasta or potatoes or rice and you don't want it to keep cooking, put cold, cold water over it, sometimes even ice, because otherwise it'll keep cooking and get mushy. That's why when people put pasta in the sink and then they walk away, you have one big glob of starch. So I'll just set that right over here because we're going to use that a little bit later. Okay, so we're back to the sauce. Put this up here. And we're going to use 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. 1, 2. You could also use a date if you'd like. I'd probably use 2 dates, but the dates are going to make the sauce thicker. So you might want to add a little more water if you're going to use dates. And then I'm going to use a rice vinegar, 1 tablespoon. Rice vinegars are sweeter. To me, they're just a little bit of a smoother vinegar, and they use them a lot in Asian restaurants. So you're building up your Asian pantry. And then tahini, I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of tahini. Get a clean one for that. Some people like to use peanut butter in a pad thai sauce, which you can use peanut butter if you want. Or if you want it, if you're really being careful, you could use dried peanut butter powder, but I think this is better for you. Just adds more flavor. And then, let's see, we're on the tahini sauce. Then we're going to add lime juice. You know I love to use fresh limes, but you can just use regular lime juice if you want. 1 tablespoon. Don't go crazy with the lime, because lime is really sour, and we're going to put tamarind in this, and that's pretty sour too. And then it calls for 2 teaspoons of tamarind. And I want to show this to you because it's tamarind paste looks like molasses. Taste it. Put a spoon in there and taste it, because if you just trust me and you're cooking with this, you're not going to know what it tastes like, but it's so nice. It's kind of sour. It's very sour. It's slightly sweet. You can use it for a lot of things. You can use it for, they use it in dips, they use it in sauces, they use it in barbecue sauces. Some people actually put it in their tea, like iced tea, because it's kind of sour. So when you think lemons, think tamarind. So 2 teaspoons of tamarind. Some pad thai recipes will call for 3 tablespoons. That's a lot. If you really love this sauce and you really want to capture that sour, go ahead and put more in. So this is the kind of thing I don't use a lot of, so you might wonder how long this will last in the refrigerator. The jury's out. Some people say 6 months, some people say 3 months. I would go with 3 months, keep it refrigerated. But don't forget you have it in there, so you can use it for stir-fry sauces and barbecue sauces. But it's expensive, but it's well worth the money. So then we have sriracha. Sriracha looks like this. It's a chili sauce. And my sister bought sriracha powder. She's on. And she told me to talk about this because sriracha powder spice is much, much, much spicier than the prepared sriracha. So just be careful. Start out with a teaspoon. If you love spice, you can add more. But just be I love spice, so I'm going to put a little more in. But just be careful how much spice you use. And then cornstarch. This is going to help it to thicken. It's going to create a glaze because we're not using oil. So the cornstarch will help it to stick to the vegetables a little bit better. Oil helps everything stick to the vegetables, but you don't want to use oil in this recipe. I'm going to put it in the blender because it just helps to emulsify the nuts and the garlic and the tamarind. So here we go. I'll turn our volume down here a little bit. Yeah, that's all you don't need to keep it on for a long time, but then put your spoon in, taste it, because what I like might be really different than what you like. Well, since I made the recipe, I'm going to tell you it's perfect. But if you want a little bit more lime or you want a little more tamarind, now's the time to play around with that. So I'm going to turn my stove back on again. And I'm going to throw my vegetables in here. So I have a pepper and I have cabbage. And this is going to cook fairly fast. Put my carrots in there. In the recipe in the PlantPure Kitchen Cookbook, I have a lot more vegetables in this recipe. But I didn't want the vegetables to outshine the noodles because this is really a noodle dish. So I scaled back just a little bit. And then I'll put the bok choy in last because when you put a green in and it wilts, it'll just cook really fast. I like pad thai sort of crispy. Some people take zucchini noodles because we're coming into the garden season and they make zoodles with it, right? And then they use a pad thai sauce on the zoodles. So you could do a raw pad thai if you want. So again, you want to have your water going in case your vegetables need just a little bit of help sauteing. So, let's go back to the noodles because let's say you were at the store and you couldn't find pad thai noodles. What you could use is fettuccine noodles. You could even use whole wheat. It's not going to be as authentic, but it will still work. Even the vegetables, you really can choose any kind of vegetable. In an Asian restaurant, they would probably, instead of using green onions, they would use garlic chives, which are kind of a cross between garlic and green onions, and those are really nice and they're real skinny. Asian markets are a lot of fun. Go explore. Our pod here in Mebane, we had a pod meeting at the Asian market. I think there were about 12 of us, and it was so fun because people knew different things about food. So it's a great idea for your when the pandemic is over, to gather at an Asian market and just get your carts and explore. We learned a lot that day. All right, that's pretty good. That's about as far as I want to go with that. I'm going to add my bok choy. This is a good time if you want to add any greens, spinach, or anything like that. And now I'm going to add my sauce. This is going to thicken. So as soon as it starts to thicken and get bubbly, that's probably when you want to turn your stove down. I have mine on high right now. I'm turning it down. See, it's already getting, the camera will show that, but you can see it's already getting really thick. And it's coating everything. Now I'm going to put my scrambled tofu in. You can see how colorful this dish is. It's just loaded. I could stop and I could just eat this and have it over rice. You don't have to use the noodles. This is a big recipe. It's bigger than I remember. And then the star of the show. Go ahead and put some of these in here. These were the long ones. Some of them are much shorter. You can cut them in half too. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and put them all in. I'd get some tongs and you can kind of move it around. really coat those noodles. It's quiet out there. No one's talking because everyone's busy cooking. So the garnishes for these are so important, but there's the one that's really important. I'm going to turn it off. Are the peanuts. You want to get your peanuts, you want to grind them down a little bit so that they, not powder, but you want them more than chunky because you want to disperse it over the whole dish. So I'm using my little chopper. See how far down I took them? You could even go further than that. Put your peanuts over the top. That's why you can use peanut butter for this. I'm going to save just a little bit for the dish.
And Karen wants to know if the veggies should be pretty firm because she said hers are quite firm still.
They're what?
How firm can the veggies be?
It's really whatever you want. Pad Thai can be almost raw because a lot of people make it raw. I would say you want it a little crunchy. You don't want it completely mushy. But the next day when you put it in the refrigerator, it will get a little bit mushier. Go ahead and plate this. And that's it. That is dinner. It's that easy. And I have mung sprouts. I have limes and a little bit of cilantro. We'll go ahead and put this on a plate. This is a really fun dish to serve to company because it goes a long ways and it's very pretty. I think I've done this for cooking classes many times because people always, it's a wow dish. So if you do cooking classes or you have pod meetings or dish to passes, do Pad Thai. Boy, these noodles are never going to end. They have to end. So the mung sprouts, if you can't find them, that's fine. But I like to put them on like that. You can put them in the stir fry, but I like to put them on the top, and then squeeze a little bit of lime, a little bit of cilantro, and that's for the camera. I'll do another bowl because I have to try it. Nelson, you want to try it? He's my taste tester. He's a really good taste tester. We'll put some peanuts on top for him. He doesn't like cilantro because he thinks it tastes like soap, right? Tastes like soap.
Yeah, I don't like cilantro.
Yeah.
Wow.
Here's a.
No, we've had this many times, but it never gets old.
No. It's going to be
Just
really hard
so-
to eat these noodles in front of the camera.
So many flavors in here. Yeah, this is kind of hard.
Yeah, these were the really long noodles. But they're more fun.
Mm.
And are the noodles
Really
mushy?
good.
They're not mushy.
Not at all.
You know, this particular brand that I used, I like it because they're not as mushy. The last one we had, we used the white rice noodles and they were a little bit mushier. But
Delicious.
yeah, thank you, Nelson.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed this recipe as much as I'm going to enjoy it in a few minutes. Next week, we're doing an authentic, whole food, plant-based Spanish paella, which is all in one pot. So I'm excited about that. It's not just rice. It's so much more than rice. So I hope you'll join us next week for Spanish paella. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions, and we'll see you back here next week.